Today's video will be focusing on the myth of Persephone and Hades, along with the site known as Eleusis. I know that most people immediately think of forced sexual situations when they think of the myth of Persephone and Hades, but this video will be taking a look at the multiple variations of the story and how the time period that it was written in helped to shape the story. Persephone was originally known as Kore, which means maiden. She was given the name Persephone after she became the queen of the underworld. Persephone means to destroy or murder. Well, okay, so people don't actually know the legit translation of it. This is just what they assume based off of context that the name Persephone means. She is the daughter of Zeus and Demeter, and there are multiple variations of her abduction myth, but I'll focus on the three that I personally have heard about the most. Each version of the myth starts the same, with Persephone in a garden or a field of flowers with other maiden nature spirits and goddesses. In the first version of the myth that we will be talking about, Hades sees Persephone in the gardens and falls in love with her. He kidnaps her to the underworld where he showers her with gifts and urges her to eat so that she isn't hungry. After a few days, Persephone finally gives in to her hunger and begins to eat some pomegranate seeds when her leash shows up and stops her from eating more. In this version of the myth, we don't know if Persephone ever came to love Hades. Version 2 starts in a similar manner. Hades sees Persephone and slowly falls in love with her, but instead of immediately taking her, he goes and asks Zeus for her hand in marriage. Zeus says yes because he wants his daughter to be married off well, and what position is better than the queen of the underworld? However, both Zeus and Hades know that Demeter is very protective of her daughter and won't agree to a marriage. The two brothers decide that the only option was for Hades to kidnap Persephone. Hades takes Persephone to the underworld, and while she isn't happy, he still treats her well. Hades gives her power and control of the underworld equal to that of his own. After a while, Persephone slowly falls in love with him. Eventually, she eats 6 pomegranate seeds because she's really hungry and hasn't eaten anything for a long time. But she knows this time that by eating the food of the underworld, she will be bound to it forever, and still chooses to eat the fruit. In both of these versions of the myth, Demeter is distraught at the disappearance of her daughter. She wanders the earth mourning and refuses to bring the harvest to the mortals. Eventually, she finds out that it was Hades who took Persephone, and she begs Zeus to give her daughter back. Zeus sends Hermes to the underworld to fetch Persephone, but he arrives after she has eaten the seeds. Zeus now has to appease both Demeter and Hades, so he declares that Persephone will spend 6 months on the surface with her mother and 6 months in the underworld with her husband. Depending on the region, the myth is told slightly differently. For example, South Italy claims that Persephone refused to leave the underworld and was forced to live with her mother for the 6 months so that Demeter wouldn't kill the mortals. Version 3 of the myth is a completely different take. In this version, Persephone finds the entrance to the underworld on her own. When she enters and sees all the souls that are in pain, she chooses, of her own accord, to stay and protect them. This version of Persephone is seen as a fierce ruler, and there is no mention of Hades. This is a much lesser known variation of the myth, but I have heard it from a few different sources, which is why we're talking about it here. When looking at myths such as this, there are a few things that we need to keep in mind. Back when the myth was first created, people didn't marry for love. I know that it sounds horrible to us, and I'm not saying that we should approve of this method, but that was how the society functioned. Back then, people married for political power, riches, and overall material wealth. Women would have no say in the arrangement, and men would treat their wives as property. This is where the story of Hades and Persephone differs slightly from the norm. In every single version of the myth, Hades loves Persephone and wishes for her to be happy. He gives her power equal to his own, riches, and the ability to make decisions on her own, for the most part. And as far as we know, Hades and Persephone stayed faithful to each other. Yes, according to our society today, this marriage is still non-consensual, but back then, it was the closest to a modern-day marriage that you were ever going to find among the gods. The ancient Greeks worshipped Persephone as both the goddess of springtime and the queen of the underworld. People would go to Eleusis and learn the secrets of the afterlife. These are known as the Eleusinian mysteries. Eleusis is the place where they believe that the kidnapping of Persephone took place, and was dedicated as a sanctuary to Demeter and Persephone. I was able to visit the site with one of my classes, and what we learned there was both interesting and terrifying. There would be yearly festivals in honor of Persephone and Demeter held, and as people would walk to the festival, they would cross the bridge over the Cephisus River. The bridge symbolized the passage of beings that belonged to the dimension of the spirits, gods, goddesses, and demons. Then they would continue to Eleusis. At the front of the sanctuary was an altar where they would make hundreds of animal sacrifices to the gods during the festival. Each year, a handful of initiates would be picked to learn the mysteries of the knowledge of Eleusis. Those initiates and the priests and priestesses were the only ones allowed inside the actual temple. Along the walls of the rooms that they would enter would be carvings of the symbols of life and death. Carvings of jars with lids represented a secret that mortals were not allowed to see. Carvings of poppy flowers represented the flowers that Persephone would grow, and the flowers themselves were likely the substance used to make a hallucinogen for the initiates to take. There were also carvings of wheat for Demeter, while actual wheat and barley would be soaked with the opium from the poppy flowers for the hallucinogens. Historians suspect that the effects of the hallucinogens would have similar symptoms to LSD. If someone were under the influence of drugs such as these, it would have been easy for the priests and priestesses to convince them that they have passed into another reality, potentially even the realm of the dead. After taking the narcotics, the initiates would be led through a gate that would send them on the path of holiness. They would sit on the steps lining the walls of a pitch-black room and be interrogated by the priests and priestesses in order to learn how to live and die better. No one knows what the initiates were shown or told, thus the title of the Eleusinian Mysteries. These rituals showed the deep respect that the people of ancient Greece held for Persephone and her situation of being stuck in between the worlds of the living and the dead. Remember that to the Greeks, the situation of Persephone was normal, even something to be worshipped, as she was a goddess of both life and death. While it seems archaic to us in modern-day times, the story of Persephone was used as an explanation for the seasons, as well as a symbolistic myth for the coming of age of maidens. Yeah, because that's what she ate. What? Can't believe this is the cave where she supposedly disappeared. Like, we're literally at the site where Persephone got abducted.